This is Success Stories. I am your host, Alan Mendenhall. Success Stories is a program at the Sorrell College of Business that highlights the lives and careers of people who have accomplished great things. I'm joined today by my good friend, Michael Maibach. Michael Maibach is now a distinguished fellow at Save Our States, but he had a long career in business. He started off actually holding public office while he was a college student, began working at Caterpillar, became a high-level executive there, moved on to Intel Corporation, where he was the founder of the Global Government Affairs Division, and became a vice president. He was president of the European American Business Council and has done many, many different things over his career. So, Michael, it's really great to have you here.
Thanks, Alan.
Well, I want to begin by asking you from the beginning about Caterpillar and your decision to start working for Caterpillar. I know when you interviewed for that job, you were asked, why would you leave public life to come work for a private company? And what was your response?
Right. Well, thank you for having me. When I was an undergraduate, I was elected to the DeKalb County Board. That's a small county, agricultural county.
In Illinois?
In Illinois, in northern Illinois. And I was a student at Northern Illinois University. So there I was, not legally able to drink, but I became a county board member, and I also was giving out liquor licenses because the county board does that. And my fraternity brothers, of course, thought that was quite entertaining that one of their colleagues would be a public official. So that's what I did, and I went to graduate school there because of that four-year term I had. When I was a public servant, age 20, 21, people said, well, now are you going to run for the legislature? Are you going to make this a career? And I was ambitious. I like politics, but I thought to myself, gosh, here I am at this ripe old age of 20 years old, and am I really going for the next 20 or 30 years be a public official, elected official, and govern other people's lives when I don't know anything about the private economy where all wealth is created? So after graduate school, I applied for a job at Caterpillar Tractor, my hometown of Peoria, Illinois. And the fellow, the vice president who I interviewed with, said, well, you know, you were an elected official, you have this graduate degree, why do you want to come here and be in our public affairs division to advocate for our company before the state legislature? That was the job I interviewed for. And I said, gee, I got to find out how wealth is created. And when you guys, people at this company make these tractors and wheel loaders and all these different products, and you help build highways and houses and mining, et cetera, all the applications. This is how you learn how wealth is created, what people do for a living that are not regulating other people's lives in government. So I want to work here to find out about the private economy, because in the end, that's where we have human flourishing. You know, people voluntarily serve. They're not told by government to do, you know, to serve others or create. And frankly, all the wealth is created by a few people that get together and start a company.
Well, you were hired to do government affairs work and lobbying, but at Caterpillar, there was an interesting policy in place at the time that required you to go work in the plants and see what life was like on the plants. You had to know how these tractors and other machinery were manufactured. Right. And you learned some very interesting management lessons during that time, did you not? Right.
So Caterpillar, typically in those days, this is 1976 when I joined them, most people stayed 30 to 40 years. This was a lifetime. In the last generation before me, people they'd come out of the Depression and World War II, so they had a job, they kept it for the whole life. Now people change every time they get a new cell phone. But in those days, people had 10, 20, 30, 40-year pins on their lapels and dresses and stuff. So one of their policies was when we hire a new college grad, before we give them, whether it's a sales job or an accounting job or a government affairs, which is what I was hired for, you go work in the factory for a year to find out how we build our products. And matter of fact, the person before me that was offered this job before I interviewed for it said, I'll take the job, but I don't want to work in the factory. That's beneath me, right? And so when I was interviewed, they said, how do you feel about working as a foreman in the factory for a year? And I said, I love factory tours. I think that'd be fascinating. So over the first 3 months, I took apart a diesel engine and put it back together. It didn't work, but that's one of the things I did. I learned how to drive a tractor and a wheel loader, and I welded And when I welded, I started one of my pants legs on fire. So I was kind of a semi-disaster out there. But then for 9 months, I was a foreman in that factory where we made aluminum torque converter parts. I had 11 people working with me, for me, and I was their manager, and good people. I found out my first day by talking to each of them that 2 of my 11, one was 50 years old, one was 18, hadn't graduated from high school. And I knew about the GRE program, which is how you can get a high school diploma if you've left high school as an older person. And so I got the materials, and a few days later I gave it to them. I said, you know, you 2 guys at night, if you go to night school together, you can actually finish your high school degree, and you can say you have a high school diploma. And they were mystified. They couldn't believe this was a possibility, and they were so pleased. And so they enrolled immediately. And of course, about a year later, I was over in the headquarters by then. They called me up and said, "We want you to come over and have a picture taken with us. We have our diplomas." So that was sort of the lesson I learned there was A, find out about people you're working with, and B, see if you can't do something that's helpful in their lives, right? And that happened to occur to me because I said, "Where'd you go to high school?" And of course, these guys had dropped out. Another thing I found out among those 11 people was in the next building, this was Building H, and Building KK it was called, they would take the 3 parts that we made from the transmission and put it into the transmission for the tractor, whether it was a wheel loader or a bulldozer or a compactor or whatever the transmission was used for. And so I asked all 11 of them, most of them have been there 10, 20, 30 years at Caterpillar, have you ever seen your parts actually put in to where they go in the tractor in the transmission box? No, that's in the next building. So I went over and introduced myself to the foreman after work one night, and I said, "Can I bring my team over so they can see what you're going to do?" And he said, "Well, if you do it, I'm going to deny that I discussed this with you, because that is really not what we do, is to move people to other buildings to see things, you know." And so I said, "Okay, I'll take all the responsibility. You'll just be surprised." So a few days later, 10 a.m., I said, "Everybody shut down your machine. We're going to walk to the next building," which was very close, right next door. And I walked down, and then I introduced them to these other 10 people that were using their parts, and they had a great time finding out. They saw where their products go. Well, when I got back to my line, my general foreman, a guy named John, I won't mention his last name, he's a good guy, but he was very, very, very upset with me. This is so, because these people are on hourly quotas of how many parts they, so we had knocked out a whole hour of productivity, and he didn't like that at all, and I respect that. And he said, you didn't have permission to take your team to another building, et cetera. And I said, "Well, they don't even know where their parts go, and they will have a bigger view of this." And he said, "Yes, but what if everybody did that?" And I said, "Then I think the company would understand their products better if everybody knew where their products were made. Bring the other people over here and see where these parts are made for the transmission." Well, he thought that was a revolutionary idea and that I was a dangerous fellow, probably. But a couple days later, the plant manager came by to see me. His first name was Ted. He became a vice president at Caterpillar, and he said, "Publicly, I got to tell you not to do stuff like that. Privately, it's a wonderful idea. I'm going to try to have a system like that here in our factory where people see who else is working on what they're working on." So there's a couple of factory stories.
Well, and how did you move on to Intel and establish the Global Government Affairs Office? How did that come about?
Well, so I worked at Caterpillar for 7 years, Illinois, and then California. They moved me out to California to start their Government Affairs Department in Sacramento. I did that for 4 years, and then they moved me to D.C. But once I moved to D.C., I went to a wedding back in California of some friends of mine, and at the wedding somebody told me there's this company called Intel. This is 1983. Everybody had typewriters. Nobody knew what a personal computer was or computer chip. I mean, they were out there, but people didn't know about them. Intel was started in '68, so it was, 12, 13 years old. It's not very old, a very small company, 5,000 people, maybe, something like that. But I heard they were looking for a government affairs manager, somebody to start their department. And there were several good people ahead of me at Caterpillar, 5 or 6 who were older, had more seniority, and I thought, geez, it'll be 20 years before I run my government affairs department that I'm in. But if I go to Intel, it'll just be me, but I can actually lead a department and do it the way I want. So I applied, and they'd already interviewed about 40 people for it. But the fellow that interviewed me, I could tell the reason he hadn't hired any of those very good people, 40 people, was he was the head of the law department, but he didn't know anything about lobbying. And I think he was afraid to fail in the sense, how do you know a good lobbyist from a bad lobbyist, right? Like if I hired an accountant, other than do you have a calculator, what would I ask them? You know, do you have an accounting degree? But I wouldn't know good questions to ask. So I sat down and interviewed with him, but the night before I put together 3 pieces of paper and sort of anticipating that that was his problem. So part of the lesson here is anticipate what the other person's issue is. And so he started asking me questions in the interview that had nothing to do with what a good lobbyist needed to talk about, right? I see you have a graduate degree in political science and in constitutional law and you know, do you know who the chairman of this committee is and stuff? But it really wasn't about managing policy for a big company. So I said, if you don't mind, Ted, his name's Ted Vian, a wonderful guy. I said, I've got these 3 pieces of paper. So I laid them out. And the first one was, here are the issues I think your company would care about in Washington and Sacramento from reading your annual report. Here are the trade associations, because you need to lobby on teams that you should join in Washington and Sacramento. And here are the 10 or 15 things I would do the first 6 months to make this department begin and have a good takeoff and be successful. So this is really how I would see this job unfolding. To which he said, can I keep these? And I thought to myself, all 40 people you interviewed could lay out this simple plan of how to do this. But in his view, this finally told him, this is a guy, if I put a quarter in, it will operate, right? And so he said, can I keep these? I said, yes, sir. And the next week he had me out to headquarters to meet other people. I had 2 other competitors for the job out there. And they gave me the job to start the government affairs department. But I think I got the job because I took the initiative to think about what the problem he was trying to solve, rather than, let me tell you about me, it was really, let's discuss what you're dealing with here. Let's see if I could be a good fit.
And you had several ethical principles for the employees beneath you. What were some of those principles?
Well, I only have one principle. I have an ethics policy. It's one sentence. Don't say, write, or do anything you don't want to show up in the newspaper, or in these days, in the internet, right? That was it. In other words, don't embarrass yourself and don't embarrass the company. We're a big global company, whether it's Intel or Caterpillar, a big global company, and that was my ethics role. And it worked very well.
Well, you were here on the campus of Troy University this week, and you gave a lecture titled Confessions of a Corporate Lobbyist.
Right.
And that talk involved several stories of your experience in lobbying,
Right.
each of which had a moral to it. I'm wondering if you have some time to tell us at least one of those stories.
Okay, I will. I'll tell you that we were trying to get an amendment to the Trade Act of 1990, I think it was 1992. There was a trade bill going through the Congress in the early 90s. And the chairman was a Republican, Bill Thomas, chairman of Ways and Means Committee, a very fine public servant, a congressman from Bakersfield, California. And on the trade subcommittee was a Democrat named Bob Matsui, who's passed away now, a wonderful human being as well. And he represented our Folsom plant, Folsom, California, because he was a former mayor of Sacramento. So he's from the Sacramento, Folsom area. We had 6,000 people in his district, and he was on the trade subcommittee. And he had been the chairman of that committee before the Republicans took over the House of Representatives, and therefore he was the ranking Democrat. So I asked him as a favor if he would put in an amendment to the dumping laws for our industry. I asked him because he represented our people and because he had been in that role for a long time, and so he knew a lot about trade law. Well, after a few weeks, his amendment, our amendment, was not getting put on the trade bill that was moving through that committee. So I went to a fellow named Bob Winters, one of the funnest people I ever met, actually, who was the general counsel for trade for Chairman Thomas. And I said, what's the problem? I'm not getting my amendment adopted. He said, well, between you and me, of course, this is many years later, but this is what he said. the chairman doesn't feel that Mr. Matsui respects him. You see, Mr. Matsui was on the committee before the chairman, and he was sort of used to having his party run it. And Matsui is a very polite guy, one of the most polite guys you'd ever meet, but he just didn't feel that Mr. Matsui was sort of respectful enough. And this is, there's a lot of human emotions that go on in work and church, and every society setting has this. And he said, so that's why your amendment's not going anywhere, because he's put a hold on it. So I thought to myself, what do I do? If I just tell Mr. Matsui, I'll get a Republican to do it, I'll offend him. He won't help me again. He will wonder why I did that. In other words, if I'm straightforward with him, he may not like the truth, but that's the best I got. So when in doubt, tell him the truth. That would be the moral. So I went to Mr. Matsui and I said, Bob, I understand, and I'm surprised to hear this, that the chairman doesn't feel like you respect him. Not that you've been disrespectful, but just that maybe you don't talk to him very much. Maybe you see him and don't stop and ask his help or something. And Mr. Matsui said, geez, I'm surprised, because I've always been very pleasant with him, and we've never had an argument, and we've got along, and I thought we got along fine. I said, well, that's the report. So what I'd like you to consider doing, I know this is not easy, is I want you personally to make an appointment to see the chairman personally and ask him to put this amendment in the bill. He said, well, our staffs have already talked. He didn't want to do this, Our staffs have already talked, and he knows me, and I said, I'm just telling you, I think this is the only way for us to have success. You and I are trying to get something done. It's not about me or you, it's about getting this done. It helps the people in our company, and that helps your district, etc. So he said, okay, I don't like this, but I'll do it. So he had made an appointment to see the chairman. 2 days later, Bob Winters calls me and he says, I don't know what you did, but the chairman just came to my office and said, this is Mr. Matsui's amendment, and I want it in the bill. What'd you do? And I said, all I said to Bob Matsui, Congressman Matsui, was, why don't you just go into his office, and here's what he said. Bill, I need your help. I've got an amendment. Will you help me get it into the bill? To which I learned later, the chairman said, Bob, I'd be delighted to help you. Thank you for coming by to ask. So what I learned was, if you just ask questions and tell people what you've learned, maybe they can take that information and act on it in such a way that it becomes win-win. Because the chairman wasn't against the amendment. He just was kind of making a point. And I bet you, I don't know, but I bet you for the rest of the time they were on that committee, their relationship was better because one helped the other, and the other was grateful for that, right?
That's right. Well, you're now a distinguished fellow at Save Our States. Explain Save Our States, what it does, and what you advocate there.
The U.S. Constitution includes the Electoral College, which is our way of electing a president. In effect, we have 50 Democratic or majority rule votes in 50 states, and then the aggregation of those electors, those electoral votes, elect the president. The left wing of American politics doesn't like a lot about our Constitution. That's one of the pieces they don't like. So they're trying to pass through state legislatures in our 50 states the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, which says, in effect, if it's passed in enough states, no matter how our people vote in terms of the presidential election, whoever wins the national popular vote, which is probably New York and California, right, and Illinois, whoever wins the national popular vote, our electors should vote for that person, even if it's against the majority vote of the citizens of our own state. And 15 states, all of one party, the Democratic Party, have passed that. And we were started, Save Our States, in 2009 to oppose this end run around the amendment process. It's supposed to take 38 states to change the Constitution. And you can't change the Constitution just by passing a law in, let's say, 20 states. 15 have passed it with 195 electoral votes. They only need another 75 electoral votes, let's say, in 5 or 6 more states, and they will actually create this constitutional crisis during a presidential campaign. You know, that's just what we need, is another constitutional crisis about a presidential campaign. America really doesn't need any more drama in our politics electorally. And so there are 5 of us, and we go around the country giving talks and interviews like this, et cetera, asking state legislators not to vote for the National Popular Vote Compact. Los Angeles County has more people than 41 states. New York City has more people than 39 states. 9 of our states have half of our people. But New York City doesn't grow any food. Iowa does, and Kansas, et cetera. The places with not very many people, they are feeding the cities. And if we have national popular vote and the cities rule, that will make all of the people in Alabama and Georgia and other places that don't have these huge metropolitan areas, that'll make them all serfs, right, working for the cities. And they won't be serfs. If you want to keep this country together, you have to act like we are together as a nation, and every state's vote is respected under the Constitution. So that's what I do, is I give talks. We don't charge anything. Go to civic groups, universities, colleges, high schools, any Rotary clubs, anybody that wants me to give a speech, or my colleagues. We go around the country, we have a travel budget, and we debate, and we otherwise defend the Electoral College.
And you interact with students a lot. Let's say a young person, a college student, comes up to you and says, Mr. Maibach, I'm having trouble figuring out what it is I want to do for a career. What do you tell that person?
Well, I usually ask them what their interests are. So for example, if I said, well, you know, because a lot of times they say, who will hire me? And I think that's the wrong question. I would ask, where are the squirrels? Squirrels play with squirrels. You have to find out what kind of a squirrel you are, right? So let's say they love travel and they love history. I say, great. If you love travel and history, you can work for the State Department as a foreign service officer, and every 3 years they'll transfer you to a different country, and you'll travel and you'll learn the history of all different countries in your career. Or you could teach history at a college and take your students abroad, you know, let's say to Europe or to Asia, and teach history that way. That's travel and history. Or you could start a travel agency that gives historic tours and take people all around the country, all around the world, giving historic tours, or around the United States for that matter, you know. And so these all very different, one's for government, one's for university, one's for private sector. All 3 involve history and travel. So what you have to find is what you're really interested in, and then find out who engages in that, and ask yourself, do I want to be in the private sector, the for-profit company sector? Do I want to be in nonprofits or a university, or do I want to work for government? So once you know what you like to do, and you know what kind of squirrel you are, then find out where are the university squirrels that want to teach what I teach, or where are the people that have a company that I want to work for. And you know, if you want to start a travel agency, go work for a travel agency and learn how it's run, and then start your own or become a partner in that travel agency. So that's just an example of finding out what you're interested in rather than who will hire you. That will come once you know what your interests are.
Well, I heard you telling one student who came to you with a similar question,
yeah,
that she ought to take out 3 issues
yeah,
of The Economist,
right,
and read through it and find what material interested her, because sometimes students don't even know what it is.
Of course. So the rest of the story is, because I counsel young people sometimes on this, I say your homework before you meet with me is you go through 3 editions of The Economist magazine and 2 editions of the National Review magazine. 5 magazines, or all weekly magazines. And rip out the stories that you would like to read if no one forced you to read them. You know, maybe nothing on Africa, but everything about the European Union. Nothing about electronic vehicles, but everything about the future of the internet. Whatever it is, maybe it's the chemical industry, maybe it's Uganda, whatever your interests are, pull them out, staple them together, and put them out and look at them for a while and say, why am I interested in all of this? And then we would sit down and say, why are you interested in these things? You know, my first essay that I published was in 1978 in my hometown newspaper on the Electoral College. So I knew when I was a college student, I wanted to speak and write about the Electoral College. Then I had 40 years of business, and now I work for Save Our States defending the Electoral College. But I've been all that career publishing on the Electoral College as sort of a hobby. So I always knew I was interested in this, and when I got out of business, I said, what am I going to do? I'm going to defend the Electoral College because the national popular vote had come along.
Well, really quickly, what was the nature of your work for the European American Business Council?
So countries are verticals. They're sovereign. They have their own laws and regulations. Companies are global, horizontal. And what they want is a friction-free market, right? So for example, the U.S. uses U.S. GAAP accounting standards. Europe uses IFRS, so two different accounting standards, right? But on and on and on, different plugs, different e-vehicle, electric vehicle plugs, all kinds of things. So what we try to do with our 75 global companies is get the European Union governments and the United States government to agree on certain things like biofuel standards or e-health standards, health records that are digitized. We're trying to get them to do that. Now, it was very, very hard to do because these two big governments both think they're so big and important that they don't want to bend to the other one. What I learned was, for example, if we'd been the U.S. Central America Business Council, we could have gotten all the Central American companies to cooperate with the U.S. because they'd want to have an open market between us. That's why there is a free trade agreement there. There's a free trade agreement between the U.S. and Central America, and NAFTA, of course, but there's no free trade agreement between the U.S. and Europe. But that's what we did. We tried to harmonize regulations and standards to open up friction-free markets.
Well, Michael, you've had a fascinating career, and you are a source of wisdom and insight. I wish more students everywhere had the opportunity to meet with you and to hear you speak. And for those that want to get in touch with you, to have you come speak to their campus, what can they do?
Just go to saveourstates.com, request a speaker, find my name there. I'm listed in Virginia because that's where my home is, but just saveourstates.com, request a speaker, or just send them an email, or they can send me an email. I'm on Facebook and LinkedIn. They can find me, Michael Maibach, on those mediums too.
Well, thank you very much, Michael. It's been a pleasure. This has been another program of Success Stories.